Just a heads up, if you haven't played this game yet, then save this video to your watch later playlist, as this video contains some spoilers for Super Mario Bros. Wonder. Super Mario Bros. Wonder. It's a new take on 2D Mario, complete with a wide selection of characters you can choose from. And with a new game release, there's usually a group of people who race to try and find any way to break the game, most likely so they can skip stuff to save a bunch of time for a speedrun. But in the first week of the game's release, there really wasn't anything major found. That is, until a casual player found a way to break out of the map. You see, between the various levels, there's an overworld map. In the map are two types of areas, one where you have to move along a set path, and the other where you can freely move around. In order to progress, you need to collect Wonder Seeds, and collecting enough of those will allow you to break open barriers to beat bosses and move on to the next world. Now what ended up happening just 8 days after Wonder's release was during a multiplayer session, the user BurgerandFreys had stumbled upon this really random out of bounds exploit. By being on a set path and having the second player in a nearby free roam area run off screen, away from the first player, and then swapping characters, the second player spawned next to player 1, but just outside of the set path. This means that for the second player, they could walk around wherever they wanted on the map. Though it wasn't quite that easy. Across the map, there are some sections you can walk along, but there are also a lot of spots without floor collision, meaning you just keep falling down. Not to mention, when player 2 gets too far away from player 1, they warp back to the first player. So was there really any use for this trick? The answer would go on to be a resounding yes.
Yeah, let's go! We're in here! And we're stuck.
Thanks to a group of glitch hunters, more strategies would be worked out to make good use of this new out-of-bounds glitch. They noticed you could roam out of bounds with player 1. In order to do this, a second player would need to grab onto a flagpole or collect a Wonder Seed in order to have a crown on the world map. This crown grants any player the power to move around with the camera freely, meaning everyone else would need to stay nearby, as if they didn't, they'd be warped back to the king. Or queen.
Isn't she a princess?
But with this in mind, you could get the first player out of bounds and go wherever you wanted to go. In fact, Zimbo7, who's part of the glitch hunting group, was the first person to ever pull off skipping the first world with this new trick. Now in order to actually perform World 1 skip, you'd need to clear the first 3 levels and enter the first house in World 1's second section. Upon letting a second player collect a seed, or touch a flagpole higher than anyone else, you'd need to head back to the little node where the house is on, and let player 1 run off screen in the upright direction. From there, have either of the players pause and switch characters. Providing it's done right, player 1 will snap near player 2, but just off the line. Now pressing straight right, left, or other straight angles will most likely bring you back in bounds. To prevent this, you'll need to walk diagonally. You still may get back on the path, even though it seems like you're moving diagonally, but enough experimentation will show you exactly how you need to move. Once player 1's tag disappears, you will no longer be able to snap back on the path, and from there you can move freely. But like I said, there is a ton of open space where you can just fall straight down. You don't want to do that. It can also be hard if the first player is in small mode, so to be a little more safe and actually stay on solid ground, it's best for player 1 to have the new elephant power-up. It's thought to give you more of a bigger hitbox, so you can stay on land easier, as you'll be getting pretty close to land's edge. Doing the out of bounds method again with the elephant power-up, move player 2 into the free roam area, and proceed to walk into these structures below, so that your character's head is generally in the center of these circular rock formations. Move player 2 again down to this lower point in the wall, so you can get roughly an idea of how low to go, so you don't clip back in bounds. Again, going too low will make you fall out and ruin the trick. When you get to about here, you pretty much want to tap up right and down right on the control stick, as holding straight right on the D-pad will make you fall out of bounds, as for some reason your angle of movement will curve. Once you make it to just below this low point, move player 2 one more time to this little hidden dip in the wall. Once your shadow is on this rock, you'll want to switch from 2 players to just 1 player. quickly tapping upright a couple times, followed by straight up. Line up the elephant ears to just below this line in the rock. Then at the same time, hold upright, the run button, and the jump button. You should have just cleared a large gap in the floor. Inching carefully along the edge of this ground, you'll eventually want to run towards this land so you don't risk falling through the floor. You're nearly done, however this node will give you some trouble, as hitting the rather large hitbox surrounding it will force you to walk right to it, starting a small dialogue. If this happens, you're stuck, but you can just use the level warp function to get back in bounds. This means you'll have to start the out of bounds process all over again. But once you do that, providing you don't get too close to the node again, you'll be home free, skipping most of World 1. All in all, this was a pretty neat find, and it only took about 6 hours from the time out of bounds was first discovered to skipping the first world. When Zimbo first pulled this off, the chat went into a frenzy. They couldn't believe you could just skip doing most of the first world. But what if I told you this story goes from 0 to 100 very quickly? Because that very same night, in the span of about only 2 hours, the community went from skipping the first world to nearly half the game. "2:06 a.m. Roblox 8192 would find a new method for getting out of bounds, which could be done pretty much anywhere. 28 minutes later, user Icay would find a skip, going from the middle of World 3 right to World 4. And another method for this trick was found by user Niels. Just before the clock struck 3, World 2 would be skipped outright by PigPopper. To say that this community was overjoyed by all the strategies that would rapidly be found is a complete understatement. But despite all the finds, it wouldn't be as massive as what would happen next. While Zimbo was busy experimenting with this new out-of-bounds strategy, the user Glitchy in the chat had an idea, given the layout of this big open part of the map called Petal Isles, and the fact that the entrance to one of the final worlds was right below where you first end up in the Isles. Glitchy thought, what if you just fall down to World 6?
Yeah, let's go! We're in here!
This was the beginning of what would eventually be dubbed Reverse Petal Isles, or RPI for short. But there'd be some issues the glitch hunters would run into. Right off the bat, you wouldn't have nearly enough Wonder Seeds to unlock World 6. The most you could do is play through a couple challenges, but that's about it. You definitely need more to get inside one of the last worlds. As a matter of fact, the game has 7 main worlds in total, with the last one being unlocked after beating the first 6 worlds. However, after enough playing around, people would eventually find out some important info to unlocking the last world, known as World Bowser. See, it'll unlock as long as the game detects that you've collected the Royal Seeds for Worlds 4, 5, and 6. These Royal Seeds would be unlocked after beating the boss for each world. It's similar to some other games, in that it only checks for certain items to be collected in order to advance to the final stages of the game. In other words, you'd still need to play through half the game in order to make it to the last world. But over the course of another couple days, there'd be some more big strategies found. Starting with a theory by user Moot, it was considered to be a possibility that you could skip the airship on the way to World 5. It was only tested on a completed game file, however Glitchy would end up being one of the first people to test it out on a brand new file. And finally, after more testing and idea spitballing, Zimbo would get airship skip. What the hell, it's another innuendo? Though I am sad to say that airship skip wouldn't get its spotlight for long, as due to a theorized faster speedrun route with RPI, there was no longer any need to get outside World 5 this way. See, starting from the Isles, you'd fall down just outside of World 6, but from there you'd carefully maneuver around the islands so you can make it to just outside World 5 and collect a few Wonder Seeds. Then you'd head back to where you originally were in Petal Isles, grab a couple more seeds, and perform another out-of-bounds skip to completely bypass Worlds 2 and 3, instead heading straight to World 4. It's a lot to take in, but eventually once in World 5, there'd be another big skip you could perform, and it was known to be possible all the way back to the original out-of-bounds discovery by BurgerandFreys. You could skip most of World 5. The fifth world is a tall vertical place, meaning that to get near the end, all you'd have to do is clip out of bounds and fall all the way down to the furthest level you can. Since the very last level cannot be interacted with until you beat the one before it, you'd have to run through this level, then quickly dash through the final short level and collect the Royal Seed, without finding a boss no less, before warping back to Petal Isles. A couple more quick seeds, and it's time for World 6. Again, it's another vertical world, and seeing as how there's a set path next to a free roam area, you could once again skip a bunch of World 6. Though it's not quite as much of a time save as you may think. You'd still need to collect enough seeds to unlock the world's castle to beat its boss and obtain the Royal Seed. However, this does allow for some creative routing to bypass certain obstacles. In just a few short days, players went from having to play most of the game to completely skipping half of it. However, there has been another theory in the works to skip through most of the final world, World Bowser, and it involves a very bizarre glitch. But before we get into that, let's recap and explain how these other strats are done. After skipping World 1, you'll end up in Petal Isles, collecting a seed from a nearby Poplin house, and after clearing a couple levels, with the last level being cleared by a second player to award them the crown, you'll want to move player 2 back down to the Isle starting point, jumping over this path node without actually walking onto the path by letting go of up while in the air. In any spot that player 1 can jump in, you'll want to pause just as soon as you reach the peak of your jump, and quote-unquote switch characters. As soon as you select OK to your character selection, hold up with player 2 so they'll walk along the path. If done right, player 1 should spawn outside the path. Keep in mind that a lot of this land does not have collision, so caution must be kept. You can walk or run across the shoreline to the left, but don't let this land deceive you. There is a lot of open space here. Instead, jumping over to where this shadow is, you can then hop over to this sand, moving player 2 as needed to adjust the camera. After hopping over these corners of the island, walking along its bottom edge, you'll want to switch back to one player mode while out of bounds, and then run down the cliff onto the land below. Being careful not to run too far down to clip back in bounds, continue to walk along the island's edges and sand pathways, jumping onto corners when necessary, to make it to just outside World 5. There's a visual guide to show you what levels to clear for this route, known as Any %, made by Scorm and a bunch of other people from the Super Mario Bros. Wonder Discord. Once you're up to the Wiggler Skip section, like last time, you'll want to have a second player with a crown by collecting a seed or being the highest person on the flagpole. After which, on this island, and upon reaching close to the peak of player 1's jump, pause and select your characters. Immediately hold down on player 2's controller upon selecting OK, and move back up once you see the first player just outside of the map's boundaries. You'll end up falling a little bit when going across the edge of this island, and that's okay. Continue to maneuver very carefully along this edge, crossing the sand pathway here. When you get to about here, keep pressing the jump button until you actually jump back up to ground level. When your feet are aligned with the top of this island, inch ever so slightly until you fall down just a bit. From here I inch to the right, occasionally moving up so I don't clip back in bounds. It's possible you may tap up one too many times and fall down, but applying the movement like I do here should help you get almost to the edge of the screen. Switch back to one player, and carefully moving around the island should help you get here. You'll fall just a tiny bit again, but just move right, and when you're in line with this lighter part of the water, run straight down and you should make it to the entrance to World 4. This is the last Petal Isles skip, and the final two clips are actually a lot simpler. With player 2 having the crown, position them just below this dark part of the half circle above this node. Right after player 1 jumps, immediately pause and select your characters. Upon selecting OK, wait a fraction of a second before moving player 2 down, then move back up after seeing the first player having a nervous breakdown on the ladder. Move the first player off the path, switch back to one player mode, and from there you're free to run while falling down, making sure you land on or near the level. In fact, this is very similar to how the out of bounds is done for World 6. The only differences are that you don't quite have the same visual cue for player 2's position, and you still have to play a decent chunk of the world. This is pretty much the route for most of the game, as when it comes time for World Bowser, you have to play through every level in that world. But the glitch hunters have come across something odd, and they're not even sure exactly how it's done. Oh no. So yes, while the fines in the first few days were absolutely insane, Nintendo stepped in and prevented Out of Bounds from ever happening again. Or so they thought. See, Glitchy wasn't gonna take this setback lying down, and after a ton more testing, made this happen.
Hello! Woo!
This was actually something that was found after a discovery of a different kind, known as bonk storage. It really wasn't all that useful, but this new block Out of Bounds was just the thing speedrunners needed to be able to skip stuff again. Or at least to skip most of World 5. This typically requires 2 blocks to perform, but there aren't many spots through the worlds to pull this off. But how are speedrunners going to do all the other skips now? Well, they could just shut off their Wi-Fi so they don't get an update. I screwed up and ended up buying another Switch and copy of the game. I'm not making good life decisions. As sad as the patch may be, this news of still being able to play the game in its original version allowed runners to dive more into the weird stuff, such as this. This odd sliding glitch can only happen under certain circumstances, and the community seems baffled as to how it even works. DennisAmane, one of the members of the glitch hunting group, had this even weirder version of the glitch happen to the player without the crown, where he walks off and then teleports. This got people thinking, could you do this in World Bowser? What makes this even more enticing is the fact that the final level can actually be entered when you first make it into the world, rather than not being interactable like World 5's final level. According to one of the glitch hunters, NiftyNova, this skip could save up to 8 minutes in the run. What appears to be happening is that if you land in certain spots out of bounds in the map, it'll bring you to the last known stage you entered, something that's been dubbed slide storage. Alternatively, during slide storage, the player can teleport straight to a level. Perhaps there's a possibility you could alter this effect to have you teleport to a different level, such as the final World Bowser level. Though as of today, no method for this has been found. But that's not to say there won't be. The game, as of this video, is a little over 2 months old, and there is plenty of time for some new discovery to be found. With the community as focused into finding new strategies anywhere they can, I think it's safe to say that only time will tell. But if you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, let me know down in the comments below. With that being said, thank you for watching, and until next time, take care and peace.